Real Madrid have famous forwards. There was Cristiano Ronaldo, Ronaldo Nazario, of course there was Karim Benzema, Ruud van Nistelrooy, Luis Figo, rather infamously, all the way back to Ferenc Puskás, whose name is on the Best Goal of the Year award. To play that center forward role for a club that has won twice as many Champions Leagues as any other, you have to have a certain amount of fame, a certain amount of aura. But then there's Joselu, a player who had his chance. He was given the opportunity in the Premier League again and again, but was unsatisfying. He wasn't that good for the same reason that everybody else that isn't good. It wasn't for a lack of motivation or a lack of luck. He just couldn't hack it. As a result, when he left the Premier League 4 years ago, going on 29 years old, there was little expectation that he would ever be heard from again. But now, Joselu has returned to the world stage as an important goal scorer for the Spanish national team and Real Madrid's new bagman. This leaves just one important question. How on earth is any of this possible? Besides, of course, one of the greatest career turnarounds of all time. But during this long and winding journey, he wore a lot of different shirts. And if you want cool shirts like the one I'm wearing today, you can check out Sangalo in the description. This banger is a Dynamos FC shirt from Zimbabwe, but if you want kits from Bhutan, India, Vietnam, Sangalo links up small clubs with cool kits around the world, the commercial opportunities like you and me. So if you want to check that out, the link, of course, is in the description. But before Joselu ended up in all of these different kits, his career was actually headed in a very promising direction. The tall, technical center forward was born actually in Stuttgart, Germany. His Galician family moved back to Spain when he was 4, and he literally remembers nothing about Germany. He claimed that his sister once showed him a picture of where he grew up, and he said that she could have shown him any picture and he would have just had to believe her. Now our boy Jose Luis Mato San Martin, which is why he goes by Joselu, started a trial with Celta Vigo at the age of 13. Essentially, he had a 28-day trial at Celta Vigo, which is excruciating because he had to go every single day for 28 days and it was 130 kilometers away from where he was living at the time. But eventually he got the contract from Celta Vigo, and by 2007 he had played in a friendly with the Celta Vigo senior team. 14 years ago in 2009 he made his official first team debut with Celta Vigo in the second division of Spain. He scored 4 goals in 24 matches and was noticed by Real Madrid. Not the time we're talking about now, this was earlier. That's right, Karim Benzema's eventual replacement was already on Real Madrid 13 years ago. You see, Real Madrid had bought him in 2009, but loaned him back to Celta Vigo for that last season, 2009-10. The purchase wasn't massive, it was just 1.5 million euros. That's a lot though for a teenager. But in 2010, he stayed with Real Madrid and played with Real Madrid Castilla, which is the Madrid's second team. In this first year, he scored 14 goals, the same as teammate Alvaro Morata. At this time, he was also playing with Dani Carvajal and Nacho. He made his debut with the senior team as well and scored a goal while replacing Benzema. Oh, the poetic arc here is just fantastic because he's gonna do it again later, except like permanently, you get it. In the 2011-12 season, he was scoring goals assisted by Cristiano Ronaldo. But even so, he spent most of that year with Castilla, where he won the top goal scorer award with 24 goals, getting Castilla promoted up to the Spanish second division for the first time in 5 years. The star was clearly on the rise, but Real Madrid let him go. He was sold to German club Hoffenheim for 6 million. This is where Joselu would begin his journeyman fade into obscurity and the inconsistency in his career that would eventually knock him out of the limelight entirely, only to return dramatically now. Now remember how I said he didn't remember where they grew up in Germany at all? Well, going to Germany was a huge culture shock for him. He himself says he has no happy memories of his time at Hoffenheim, and despite sky-high expectations coming from, playing at Real Madrid, he scored 5 goals in 25 matches. The following year, he did a loan move to Eintracht Frankfurt, where, despite not playing for the first 12 matches, really, he burst onto the scene in match week 13 with a brace. And he ended the season with 14 goals, a pretty good tally for a team in 13th in the Bundesliga. Now, the manager, Heribert Bruchhagen, I can only assume that is the correct pronunciation, said, "We all assumed Joselu would stay with us, but this is the first in a few times that Joselu's had a bit of a falling out with the club that he was at, because instead of returning to Eintracht Frankfurt the following season, he was sold to Hanover. The sale went through for 5 million euros, and in the following season, Hanover would also finish 13th, and Joselu would score 10 goals in 32 matches. It was a string of a couple solid seasons for mid-table Bundesliga sides that invited Stoke to make an offer, and they did, signing him for 8 million euros, meaning Joselu would be on a 4th different club in 4 years. But as our researcher Yakov titled the section in the notes, this was Stoke City flop top time. In 27 total appearances, Joselu would score just 4 goals in the Premier League. As Stoke forward Bojan Krkic would explain, he arrived at a time of transition, and it was difficult for him to enter. He also said they did not give him the continuity he expected. Part of this was because Krkic, of course Xherdan Shaqiri, and Marko Arnautovic were the preferred forwards at Stoke at the time. This was Stoke Alona. By the time his second season at the club had started, he was not even being selected for matches against Stevenage in the Cup. So he sought out a loan and ended up at Deportivo La Coruña back in Spain, which was a wise move, because according to this article by The Athletic, Joselu was considered the 7th choice striker at Stoke by the time his second season there started. And yes, we are still headed to a point where he is bagging goals for Spain and Real Madrid, like actual Real Madrid. And at the point of the story we're in, he's already 26. His spell at Coruña was unspectacular. He scored 5 goals in 20 appearances in La Liga and was then sold to Newcastle. And this, like the Stoke City situation, it turns out, was not exactly the healthiest situation for him to have been paradropped into. Remember, Newcastle's owner at the time was beloved figure Mike Ashley. He had promised Rafa Benitez to spend every last penny now that Newcastle had been promoted back to the Premier League. Then he promptly blocked a loan deal for 19-year-old Chelsea player Tammy Abraham and settled on Joselu instead. Rafa Benitez describes the situation. At Newcastle, we were signing players for not very much money. It's like when you buy a car. If you have big money, you can buy a very good brand. If you don't have too much money, you buy a car that maybe can do the job, but it's not so spectacular and not so fast. Ouch. But they paid just £5 million for him, and he clearly had a few goals in his boots. But the other half of the equation, the fans, they weren't on board, considering the hype of going back to the Prem and then bringing in a striker who was a middling player on a 16th place team in the Liga. Despite the fact that it was universally agreed he was showing a lot of grit, determination, and effort, he was just being physically overwhelmed in the Premier League. And he didn't offer the type of explosive athleticism that the Newcastle fans wanted. They would be rooting for Mitrovic to come off the bench instead. One notable match at West Brom away, they were chanting Mitrovic's name while Joselu was on the field. But in spite of his inability to win basically anybody over, Rafa Benitez did note his qualities. If you analyze him technically, he's quite good, he said. I remember a training session in the stadium and he was scoring great goals with volleys. Technically, he's good, both feet, passing, and shooting. He's good in the air. But I will say it again, our fans were expecting pace. But finally, a recognition that that quality that could take him to the next level was boiling just under the surface. After 2 years, he would leave Newcastle, and Newcastle's fans' thoughts on the matter can be summed up in this 5-year-old article from The Mag. Not the best player Newcastle United have ever had, but not the worst. Certainly when it comes to effort, you have to say he's one of the better ones. Good. With Rafa Benitez limited to buying a Stoke reserve, the vast majority of Newcastle fans obviously knew they weren't getting Lionel Messi. I remind you, they're talking about a guy who is now the premier striker at Real Madrid and leads the line for Spain. Continuing to some of the comments left under his birthday message at Newcastle, they threw a party, but he missed it. Brutal player. Off your you big Spanish donkey. Hopefully he got a right foot for his birthday to replace one of his 2 left ones. Good. Understandably, 2019 was a low point. He signed for Deportivo Alaves for £2 million. But it was here, out of the limelight at the bottom of La Liga, that Joselu would become what he is now, which is, according to Alaves manager Javi Calleja, one of the best center forwards in Europe. Contrast that with the fact that nobody at Stoke or Newcastle would have been surprised if they never heard from him again. He was 29, going to play in Spain, disappearing into the mist. But instead, he came flying back out of that mist dressed like freaking Superman. After the first 2 years of narrowly avoiding relegation, he'd become frustrated with the club not adding enough help, and he'd actually asked to leave. Then he was promised by the club they would add more help. They didn't add more help. He scored 14 goals anyways, and the club got relegated. Some would call those video game numbers. Now you can watch me play video games like Football Manager and stuff and talk about soccer football on Twitch. The link is in the description. I'll see you there. It was a bit of a nasty breakup. He'd end up leaving for free. He said they promised me things that were not fulfilled. But the fans at Alaves still love him. The club was essentially toxic. It was bleeding money and had to cut its budget huge once it got relegated, and so Joselu left for free and signed with Espanyol to start the 2022 season. He had a couple of good years for a team getting relegated, but he was still just about to turn 32 and on another bad team in the Liga. But for some weird reason, he just kept getting better. With Espanyol last year, he scored 17 goals and got 4 assists. And Espanyol got relegated. While getting relegated, he won something called the Zara Trophy, which is given to the highest scoring Spanish player in all of La Liga. And he wasn't just padding his stats against bad teams, he scored against Barca and Real Madrid. He also scored a Puskas contending goal with this ridiculous lob from 50 yards out. But despite his individual brilliance, club toxicity continued to find him. The owners of Espanyol are not exactly loved. It's a conglomerate from China that has been ruining the club. You've heard this story before a million times over. But Espanyol also got screwed. They had a pivotal match against Valencia where VAR was consulted improperly or not consulted when it should have been on multiple occasions that ended up losing them all 3 points against Valencia and essentially condemning them to relegation. But despite that pain, right before all of that started to happen to Espanyol, Joselu got an incredible call up to the Spanish national team. At the age of 32 in March of 2022, he made his debut against Norway off the bench in Euros qualifying. He scored 2 goals. After Espanyol's relegation, he was called up to the squad for the Nations League semi-final and what would eventually be the final as well. He came off the bench against Italy in the semi-final, and he scored the winning goal. And then, of course, in the final against Croatia, it goes to a penalty shootout because I'm pretty sure I could play against Croatia and go to a penalty shootout. And who steps up to take the first penalty but Joselu? And he scores it, and Spain wins. Since his call-up in March, he's played in all 4 of Spain's matches, won a trophy, and scored 3 goals. As Luis de la Fuente takes over for Luis Enrique, he has clearly become one of the favored choices up top. And it was around this summer that random fans from Stoke were turning on their TV, watching the Nations League semi-final to see a guy that used to be rotting on their reserves scoring a winning goal, that people started to take notice of the ridiculous trajectory of the aging Joselu. Simon Lowe, a writer and author who is also notably a Stoke fan, said it's remarkable that he has had this career flowering so late in his career. I must admit, when I saw he had played for Spain, or rather that a player with his name had played for Spain, I had to look him up to check it was the same player. I thought he might have retired, but yes, it was him. And oh my word, what a story at the age of 33 to see him going back to Madrid. Because that same summer that he was bagging a goal against Italy, scoring a penalty against Croatia, he was signing for his old club, Real Madrid. See, Real Madrid was in a bit of a pickle. It just lost a talismanic forward sooner than it thought it would in Karim Benzema, and needed some way to replace him that wasn't super expensive. But as luck would have it, the highest scoring Spanish player in the Liga was on a team that just got relegated. And the price for him was even lower because he's 33. This made Joselu the first 30 and up signing by Real Madrid in over a decade. And it was a cheap one. Just 500,000 euros to loan him in for the season, and if the loan goes well, they can buy him for 1.6 million euros. And it's with all of those facts in mind that the rise of a guy from Stoke City's reserves to Real Madrid's front line makes complete sense. He's not somebody that's going to go on long runs or dazzle with his brilliant passing consistently, but he is a tall, technical finisher who is just living in a world full of confidence. Just because it makes sense now doesn't mean this whole story isn't still completely insane. His former teammate Shay Given says as much. One day you're on the bench at Stevenage, close your eyes, and when you wake up you're playing for Spain and signing for Real Madrid. The club that Joselu says he's been dreaming about joining again since he left over 10 years ago. But how's he got on since he re-signed for Real Madrid? Well, he did this in his debut. So he's off to a decent start, to the point that people thought he was going to take the number 9. He's left it open. He took the number 14 at Real Madrid instead. Some are speculating that's because Kylian Mbappe is going to take the 9 next season. But what's crazy is that Joselu was considered in with a chance to wear that number 9. And regardless, he will play in that spot a lot this season. If you want to read more about Joselu, everything we used for the research of this video is linked in the description, including a great article by The Athletic that details a couple of very interesting personal stories about the progress, as well as videos of his various interviews and, of course, his goals. You can also just stay right there and keep binge watching videos. This is a video about a wonder kid who comes from the Arctic. Not actually the Arctic, but he comes from Alaska, so pretty freaking close. Farther away than most places in the Arctic.